Mr. Speaker, thank you. The American people are sick and tired of powerful corporations ripping us off. Junk fees, small businesses struggling, union busting, price gouging, bad trade deals, all of it. I'm convening this special hour today because I'm committed to fighting back. Here because we need to revive and restore and strengthen the American dream for all who are willing to work for it. I know my constituents are. I know the American people want more from this body. In the depths of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt confronted these same forces in a different time head on, saying, and I quote, "These economic royalists complain that we seek," this is President Roosevelt, "to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain of is that we seek to take away their power." Absolutely. There's no freedom if families are struggling to meet basic needs. There's no liberty if we're ruled by oligarchs. No one's going to say that profits don't matter. They do, but something else has to matter too. Our safety has to matter. Our jobs have to matter. Our communities have to matter. This country has to matter. For those things to matter, we have to break this corporate stranglehold on our economy and our country. The American economy works just great if you're a billionaire, if you're a giant corporation, but too often our system fails hardworking people. We need an economy and a government reward hard work, not just extreme wealth. Where I come from, where I grew up, that's something we value. I represent the good people of the 17th District of Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. We believe in hard work. We believe in patriotism. We believe in sacrifice. We're the folks who made the steel that built this country. We've answered the call in every war. We've done hard work like so many across this country have done. But we saw a story that rewarded that sacrifice with trying to strip us for parts, shipping good jobs away overseas, gobbling up small businesses, squeezing them, seeing big, powerful corporations put their lust for profit ahead of our safety. We have to stand strong against those forces, a lot of them created by corporate power that are making life worse for people. It's making life more expensive and too expensive. If American capitalism is going to succeed, we've got to have competition. We've got to take on anti-competitive monopolies, give small businesses, entrepreneurs a shot to succeed and compete, make sure that our safety and our communities aren't collateral damage in the way of profits, and make sure that workers have some say and dignity on the job, the freedom to form and join a union. The American dream has been snatched away from far too many Americans who are hardworking, who are good and decent people, who want to have a shot at dignity, security. It's a devastating reality for folks to live with. It's unacceptable to me. I know it's unacceptable to many in this chamber. And some folks are angry about it. They're sad. They should be. They should expect more of this body, and they should expect more of their government. So I think we need to lay a path back to the American dream. I'm honored to be joined by so many colleagues tonight who will join me in this fight to restore and strengthen the American dream with a strong economic message of taking on corporate power, local action, being unafraid to fight the bad guys when we need to. We can deliver for the American people to bring down costs, to reward hard work, to make life better and cheaper. We can make sure the American dream is revived and strong for generations to come. So I'm proud to yield time to one of my colleagues just next door in the great state of Ohio, Mr. Landsman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Deluzio, for hosting tonight. It is crystal clear that people are frustrated. They're frustrated with politics. They're frustrated with the economy. And they want costs down and an economy that is built for working people, the middle class, our small businesses. And I think it's really important for us to have this conversation and to start with the reality. And the reality is that the system is rigged, and it's been rigged for decades. It works for the super wealthy, while everyone else is left behind facing higher prices and a tax system that helps the rich get richer. So this started in the 80s with huge tax giveaways to the wealthy while gutting oversight and regulations. The result is that the system is producing the outcomes it was designed to produce. The top 1% in the United States now holds 12 times the wealth of the bottom half of American households. That's what this system produced. Think about that. 1% of Americans own more wealth than half of all American families combined. So when people look at their bank accounts and they're frustrated and they get their grocery bill and they get their tax bill and they're wondering where all their money went, they know. They know. They see on their phones and on the news how rich the rich have gotten. That's where their money has gone. The super wealthy and powerful have seized more and more of our money and more of our power. Let me say that again. The super wealthy and powerful has seized more and more of our money and more of our power. Since the pandemic, billionaires have become $3 trillion richer. Their wealth has grown 3 times faster than inflation. Corporate profits have gone up 54%, wages only 26%. Now, what's Congress's solution? The 2017 Trump tax bill was a massive handout to corporations and billionaires. The majority of the benefits went almost entirely to the top 1%, and it added $2 trillion to the national debt. And here in these halls, folks want to do it again. Members of Congress who have continually bent the knee to billionaires and their corporate PAC donors, they're now going to take their money, follow their orders, give them the tax giveaways they want, gut regulation, allow for more corporate consolidation, which means that consumers lose more and more power in the marketplace, pay more and more for goods and services. I don't accept corporate PAC money because I know that folks expect us to be with them, not the super wealthy. Now, most politicians, unfortunately, do take corporate PAC money, and I believe it is one of the reasons why there is so much pushback to, say, Medicare negotiating lower prescription drug prices, or attempts to privatize Medicare, or any effort to pursue common sense gun reform. Think about how much the gun manufacturers make, billions and billions of dollars. Now, many of them are all in on spending trillions on the super wealthy through tax reform because it helps their own interests. It's not what people want. People are struggling and they want change. They're tired of the status quo. They're saying that over and over. But for decades, that's what they've been given. We've appeased billionaires and big corporations while leaving working people, the middle class, and small businesses behind. So, in the next Congress, we have an opportunity to pass a new tax bill. What if 100% of all tax reform benefits went to working people, the middle class, and small businesses? The last time Congress passed a big tax bill, almost 90% went to the top 1%. What if 100% of any tax cuts went to working people, the middle class, and small business? 100%. And it should be paid for by making the super wealthy just pay all their taxes just like the rest of us. Big corporations and the super wealthy don't need our tax cuts. The middle class, small businesses, and working people, they need them. By giving people enough money to support their families, pay their groceries, and contribute to our economy, we're all better off. Everyone at the top should pay all of their taxes so every American can pay all their bills. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Ohio, and he's right. We have to confront this corporate power. We've got to build an economy and a government that rewards hard work, not just obscene wealth. And you talk about the way we all feel that squeeze. We feel that power hurting us. We all hear from our constituents about the cost of groceries, the cost of food. You don't have a choice to not feed your family. And we're feeling it and we're hearing about it constantly, of that pressure folks are under to make ends meet, to put food on the table. People's paychecks aren't going as far in the grocery store, the checkout line. It hurts budgets, it hurts families. They're asking, who is responsible? Why is this happening? And no doubt, a few years back, food and grocery supply chains were affected by the pandemic, but a Federal Trade Commission report made clear that disruptions from the pandemic disproportionately impacted small firms because larger companies tried successfully to protect their power, their market share. There's very little competition across much of the grocery sector. It's not marked by heavy competition. The four biggest grocery retailers account for nearly 70% of sales across the country. And among food suppliers, four firms control more than 60% of sales in most grocery categories. That's not terribly competitive. Without real competition, large grocers and retailers, they've got power to, guess what, set prices that we all pay for. We've seen price gouging by these corporations well above the level of inflation. And I want to acknowledge and yield time to one of my colleagues who I know has been fighting hard against not just corporate power, but to bring down costs for folks, and especially in the grocery store. So I'm, Mr. Speaker, happy to yield to the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much to my colleague from Pennsylvania. I am so grateful for your leadership every single day on behalf of hardworking Americans across your district, across our country. Something is wrong in this country. Families go to the grocery store and they can't afford milk or eggs or cereal that their kids like. Poor and working class people are struggling under the weight of inflation. They can't make ends meet. And at the same time, the richest 1% and corporate CEOs are still taking home record profits. A recent poll confirmed that 2/3 of Americans think, quote, "One of the biggest problems facing us today is that a handful of corporations have too much power," end quote. The numbers back this up. Despite rising costs that are squeezing poor and working people across the country, corporate profits are bigger than ever. It's a simple story of corporate monopolies price gouging consumers. So I want to start with eggs, because I like to eat eggs every morning. I think there are a lot of people who like and look at the price of eggs. It's a staple. Before the pandemic, the price of a dozen eggs hardly ever went over $3. But in 2022 and 2023, we saw record high egg prices. Now, according to Farm Action, this price increase was because dominant egg producers used inflation and avian flu as a cover-up to extract profit margins as high as, wait for it, 40% on a dozen eggs. This should come as no surprise because there's a long record of collusion in the egg industry. In 2023, a jury found that Cal-Maine and other egg producers actually did collude to fix egg prices. Now let's look at diapers, another issue that is so big for so many families across the country. Bloomberg reported in July of 2021 that the cost of Pampers nearly doubled from $25 for 200 diapers to $40 for 168 diapers, and that price increase was just in 6 months. More money for fewer diapers. Now, it's true that there was a shortage of some diaper materials during the pandemic, but guess what? Those shortages stopped, and you didn't see the prices stabilize. You didn't see the prices of key materials coming back to normal. When you go to the store and you see diaper brands like Huggies and Loves and Pampers, the real story is turn them around and see who they're owned by. Because all of these different brands that are on your grocery shelves are owned by only two companies, Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark. And those account for about 70 to 80% of the market. So even as the cost to make diapers has gone way down, these companies are still keeping the prices high, and they're reporting record profits. I want to go to healthcare because it's another place where my constituents and people across the country are talking about the high costs of healthcare. We've seen big insurers, private equity, and other big corporations buying up hospitals and other healthcare providers. My home state of Washington has been particularly affected. A handful of healthcare systems now control 90% of the hospital beds in the state of Washington. Now, some studies have found that these mergers are especially bad for people in rural areas because it actually causes smaller clinics to eliminate services like obstetrics or pediatrics, or even to close entirely. And all of this has led to unprecedented corporate control over healthcare in my home state and across the country. People across the state across the country are seeing the negative effects of this increased corporate power in their daily lives. A family physician who worked at a clinic in my district testified that the quality and availability of care decreased after the clinic was bought by a large national healthcare network. Another witness testified that the price that her insurer paid for monthly infusions to manage her chronic illness that she had nearly tripled from $24,000 to $74,000 per visit without any increase in the quality of care. The president of the Washington State Nurses Association testified that he had seen increased costs and decreased access to care for his patients. All of these stories confirm what we now know. Corporate greed in healthcare or in any industry raises costs and makes life harder for Americans. It does not have to be this way. As elected officials, it's our job to ensure that government is keeping these corporations in line and keeping prices low for the American people. So I want to tell you a story now about what government can do when we fight corporate power. In 2015, two grocery store chains merged, Albertsons and Safeway. They wanted what corporations always want in these big mergers, and that is more money for themselves, their CEOs, and their shareholders. They said that the deal would be better for people in my home state of Washington and across the country. They claimed that the merger would pass on savings to consumers and not line the pockets of CEOs. But what actually happened? Well, here's what actually happened. Instead of streamlining, dozens of stores were closed. Those closures created food and pharmacy deserts, made it harder for many people in already underserved communities to get fresh food or get their prescriptions. Older adults, students, people with disabilities, people in rural communities, low-income residents, those are the ones that suffered the most. Workers at the stores that closed, by the way, also lost their jobs. And despite all of those corporate promises, workers and consumers were the ones who suffered. That is what happens when government does not challenge corporate power and monopolies. We lose. So when Albertsons announced in 2022 that it was going to merge, this time with Kroger, people were rightly worried that the prices would go up, worried that there would be fewer choices and deserts in their communities, that more grocery stores would close. And when asked about the merger, one Washingtonian told the Seattle Times that she was worried that her local store would close. She said, "If there are no other grocery stores that I can walk to, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is my store." Another said that he worried that the merger would make it so that these guys' prices would go sky high. Workers worried that it would be harder for them to bargain for better pay and working conditions, that store closures would mean layoffs, that their families would face uncertainty and hardship once again. But this time, something was different. My colleagues and I urged the Biden administration to challenge the proposed deal, and the Federal Trade Commission agreed that we could not allow another bad merger to go through. The FTC and many state attorneys general, including in my state, challenged the deal. And while that challenge is still in court, we have delayed and will continue to work on blocking this bad deal. So it's just one of the stories of what can happen when an administration, when a government takes on corporate greed the way that the Biden and Harris administration did, the way that we Democrats have done that on everything from egg prices to collusion by landlords driving up rental prices. Now, I'll be honest, I'm worried that the Trump administration may not keep up these fights against corporate power, especially as we see the proposed cabinet being stacked with people who have close ties to Wall Street. We certainly saw the last Trump administration conduct the largest corporate tax giveaway in history, putting hundreds of millions of dollars into the hands of big corporations like Verizon and Facebook and Amazon while shorting regular Americans. And we've seen the extreme conservative appointees on the Supreme Court accept lavish gifts from their big business buddies while overturning government efforts to clamp down on corporate power. We cannot allow the next administration to repeat these mistakes. We need to hold their feet to the fire. We need to make sure that they're working in the interest of all Americans, not just big corporations and the wealthy. We don't want a situation where the wealthiest in this country once again get gold bars and working people get maybe 8 weeks of groceries. That's breadcrumbs. That's not what middle-class, working people, and poor people across America deserve. And that's why I've got a lot of real solutions to these problems. My Stop Corporate Capture Act would give the people, not big corporations, a say in government. My Stop Anti-Competitive Healthcare Act would give the government the power to challenge hospital mergers and protect access to quality health care. And of course, my Ultra-Millionaire Tax Act would make sure that the ultra-wealthy pay their fair share. When we take on corporate power, we win for working people. When we lower prices, we win for working people. We allow people to put food on their table. We can raise wages so Americans don't have to work 3 jobs to get by. We can stop corporations from being so big that they don't care if they're failing consumers. And we can make sure that government works for all of us. I want to thank you to my colleague, Rep. Deluzio from Pennsylvania, for your leadership on this issue and on so many issues facing us today. And I yield back.
Speaker, I thank the gentlelady from Washington, certainly for her strong leadership and fight against these horrible mergers that are anti-competitive, that we're all paying for, and for so much fight on behalf of working people across this country. We know that when corporations throw their weight around, all too often, our constituents are hurt, small businesses are hurt, workers are hurt. It's also dangerous at times. We know that when there are monopolies, our supply chains are weaker, there's more likely to be something that happens that might hurt us. And I'll remind us of the baby formula shortage we saw in this country in the early part of 2022. It was set off because Abbott Labs, a company that dominates that industry, had a recall of its formula due to dangerous bacteria outbreak in one factory. Multiple babies died. They had to shut down their factory in Michigan. Horrible situation. And shutting down just one factory, caused a nationwide shortage. Many places, store shelves were bare. Families were scrambling across the country, particularly families with babies that had special dietary needs. Delaware, Kansas, and Tennessee were reported to be the hardest hit states, but we felt it. In places like Pennsylvania, my then young son wasn't quite a year old. My own family worried about whether we could find formula, and thank goodness we could. But we think, and there's research saying that some of those impacts might be still ongoing, that infant health suffered during this shortage, that babies may still feel the effects of that. Our supply chains can never be so weak that one single factory can cause such havoc all over the country. It's not just they make our supply chains weaker, these powerful companies, they distort our democracy. They weaken faith in our elections. They corrupt with the money through our elections and our campaigns. So I'm proud to yield time to the gentlelady from Illinois, who I know is a hard fighter for campaign finance reform and to protect this democracy, Ms. Ramirez.
Thank you, Congressman Deluzio. I'm really grateful that you're convening this special order hour on a topic that I believe that is so critical to so many of the conversations that we're having right now. Look, you're talking about babies still impacted. You brought me back to thinking about growing up for me. I grew up in Humboldt Park in the city of Chicago, and I saw my immigrant parents work really long hours, the minimum wage jobs. My dad worked 2 jobs, my mom worked 2 jobs, and somehow she also managed to give a lot of time to her local church. What they couldn't afford was childcare. My mother worked first shift, so my dad can work third shift, and they can figure out how to make sure that their kids always had someone at home. And that meant that my parents could barely ever see each other. My parents' experience is not very different from the reality of so many others right now. And look, I witnessed the struggles of my community to secure stable housing, to ensure quality education for their children, and to raise a family with a rising cost of living. But let me be very clear. Working people are still struggling. The cost of living in America, well, let's just say, we say it, right? It's too damn high. Too often I hear my constituents, my neighbors talk about having to make a decision. Can I go to the grocery store and buy the eggs and buy the milk, try to get some spinach, try to get the bread, pay the $2,200 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago, and then afford my inhaler? And Congressman, oftentimes what ends up happening is that people have to choose between being able to feed their children and their health care. Feeding their children and an inhaler. In one of the most richest countries in the whole world. Why is it so hard for us to move a working people's agenda in Congress? Like, you would think there's more of us that come from working class than ever before. Some of us actually understand what it's like to have to help our parents who are probably making $100 too much for Medicaid, so they need help covering their health care. Like, there are more of us here who are working class. But somehow, a working people's agenda in this place doesn't seem to be a priority. We ask ourselves, why doesn't the American people trust that we're working for them? Well, let me answer that question. When unchecked corporate power and greed in the marketplace meet unchecked corporate money in politics, well, we have a problem. And it's families in Illinois 3, 4, 5, your own district, who end up suffering because of it. We know that price gouging, price fixing, predatory algorithms, and corporate monopolies put profits and production over people. And it's why I joined my colleagues in sending a letter that Congresswoman Jayapal was just talking about around opposing the Kroger-Albertson merger. Because we have to resist the consolidation of corporate power if we're going to protect working people. I'm also a proud co-sponsor of Congresswoman Omar's Shrinkflation Reduction Act, which would enhance price transparency for consumers and combat the deceptive practice of shrinkflation. Look, I go to my local grocery store, and I can literally see the difference between what people in my community are paying and what someone else in a community that has 4 grocery stores pays. They usually pay 25% more. We need the kind of accountability that bills like this will bring. Shrinkflation practices hide behind the language of inflation, but we know that actually consumer exploitation is intended to defraud us, that corporations can continue to profit while providing less product. And listen, we know how corporations are able to get away with these practices. It's because they use their profits to buy the same exact people who are responsible for holding them accountable. Yeah, I said it. Big money in politics, whether poured into elections or directly in the pockets of corrupt public servants, gives special interests in corporations outsized influence in our democracy. So when a good bill comes before us, when a good bill comes to the committee, somehow we can't actually debate the bill. Because it's a good bill, it should pass. But these corporations have the power to buy elections and buy elected officials. And look, our democracy is weaker and our communities suffer when the voices of working families are buried under the influence that millions can buy. We see it too often. It's why we need bills like H.R. 1118, 1118, the Disclose Act, to end the scourge of dark money buying our democracy. And it's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of the act that Rep. Pappas has introduced, because it does a couple things. It requires super PACs and dark money groups to disclose donors who've given $10,000 or more during an election cycle. It requires those spending money on ads to disclose their donors. And it cracks down on the use of shell corporations to hide the identity of a donor. If you are donating to an elected official or candidate, the public should know who you are. And the Disclose Act bill does just that. Because look, if our democracy is not for sale, which it shouldn't be for sale, then mega donors should not be attempting to buy our democracy. And it means we have to bring the full power of the federal government through regulation, through accountability, and through transparency to fight for working people, for our constituents. And it's also why I think it's so important that we're co-sponsoring legislation like Congresswoman Jayapal's bill, which is the Stop Corporate Capture Act, H.R. 1507. It institutes reforms to right-size the influence of corporate interests over a regulatory process. It increases transparency of government rulemaking decisions, and it establishes a mechanism for the public to hold agencies accountable. We have to do everything possible so that the American people trust that those of us that are in the people's house are actually here for them. Because the reality is that they don't. They do see us as people who are here to enrich ourselves. People are here to hear ourselves speak. Working families demand accountability, and they have given us a mandate. They're asking us for bold solutions to economic justice, and it means taking on corporate greed. As we get closer to an administration that has promised to weaken the pillars of our democracy more than ever, I think it's going to be critical that progressives, but every Democrat, frankly, every elected official that's here for working families, get together to unite and address corporate greed. Because if we don't, we'll continue to see what we see now. Corporations becoming wealthier than wealthy can possibly be, while poor people continue to have to choose between healthcare and feeding their children. Congressman Deluzio, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for bringing up such an important, critical issue that I look forward to working with you in the next Congress. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I thank the gentlelady from Illinois for her powerful words. This democracy is not for sale, and that should not be something that's controversial in this chamber or anywhere else. Our constituents expect us to fight for all of them. One of the places that we've seen this consolidation, this concentration, this raw power really hurt folks, agriculture. We see it because we know that food production is a key step in that grocery supply chain that we know we hear from our constituents about costs being too high. We're all paying more, too much, for food because of this consolidation that we see in agriculture. Folks are getting ripped off. They're tired of it. This increased consolidation, it also puts the squeeze on smaller local farms, family farms, small businesses, often deeply rooted in their communities, in my community, the communities of so many of the members of this chamber. This summer, I visited a farm in my district and met with farmers from the Beaver Lawrence, Pennsylvania Farm Bureau Roundtable. Some of them are livestock producers. They sell their meat or poultry to be packed or processed. And the meat packing and processing industries, some of the most heavily consolidated in the country. Very little competition. For the past decade, the 4 largest meat packing and processing corporations in the United States, they've maintained about 2/3 of the country's market share. And some independent research has found this consolidation to be even higher, with the largest 4 firms holding up to 85% of the market share in beef processing and around 60% in poultry. That's not very competitive. It doesn't meet the spirit of competition that we want and need for American capitalism to succeed. At that meeting in Beaver County, I heard that compared to larger competitors, these folks had to maybe wait longer to get their livestock in to be taken in by these giant processing corporations, and that they're having a hard time negotiating fair prices, fair compensation. That's squeezing those farmers, those small businesses. That's something we're all going to pay for. It also may be a violation of federal law, the Packers and Stockyards Act. And so after hearing from these constituents, these farmers, I wrote to the Agriculture Secretary calling for action. And that high level of consolidation, once again, is driving up costs for all of us. That market power also means that processors have increased buying power, that they can use to dictate prices to smaller farmers who struggle to stay afloat. And we need a strong agriculture industry. We need family farmers to make it to that next generation, Mr. Speaker. So we've got to promote competition in the food industry, from the farm to the grocery store, every part of that supply chain. And that also means we need antitrust enforcement with some teeth, with some muscle behind it, and real consequences for violations. And this Congress and this administration, the next, should be willing to do that work, to take on rip-off monopolies, to create an environment that fosters competition. That's the spirit of American capitalism that I think we all want, that our constituents expect of us. One where small businesses and farms can grow and thrive. And one place we've really seen, Mr. Speaker, small businesses feel the squeeze, local pharmacists, local pharmacies. You know, these are, you walk across any main street in most of our districts, almost probably any of our districts, there are great small businesses that anchor our communities. There may be multi-generational business, and pharmacies are one of those places. People like their local pharmacy. The pharmacist gets to know their patients. Those are relationships that are important for people's health, and they add to the vibrancy of our communities. But people suffer when they lose competition, when we lose those small businesses across our communities. I visited Town Drugs in Aspinwall, an independent local pharmacy, and I was there with other pharmacists as well, small business owners. And I heard stories about how pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, are frequently steering customers toward their own chain pharmacies. It hurt the bottom line of independent pharmacists. And many of these PBMs are often vertically integrated, where they've got a mail order pharmacy, maybe they've got a retail operation, they might have an insurance business on top of that PBM or pharmacy benefit manager business, often charging high or ridiculous fees for paperwork errors as a way to not have to pay those pharmacists and those pharmacies full price. Heard about inconvenient higher prices for customers, heard about patients being steered toward maybe more expensive medications or specific pharmacies dealing with relationships and networks and all the rest. In Pennsylvania, this year alone, estimates are around 80 local pharmacies have closed. 80 pharmacies. Those are options that are now gone. And it's not just smaller independent pharmacists. The big chains are feeling the squeeze too. Fewer options, worse service for patients who need a prescription, who need to get their drugs filled. It's not good for our economy. And once again, it's this out of control corporate power, Mr. Speaker, that's making people's lives worse, hurting small businesses, hurting patients, hurting our communities and our main streets. We need action on PBM reform. I'm a co-sponsor of several measures here, the Help Copays Act, the Patient Act. These are just some examples of bills that I think this chamber should pass in advance to fight back, to protect local pharmacies, to protect patients, to protect competition that we need in the healthcare economy. We've got to keep up that fight against this out-of-control corporate power to lower healthcare costs, a place that we hear from our constituents all the time, and to protect small businesses. Another example here where we see corporate power making life worse. Now, not a healthcare problem. We see it under the golden arches. McDonald's. People don't think of McDonald's as a small business. It's a big corporation, of course, but it operates as a franchise system. Many franchise owners are small business owners. And yet, we know, the internet reminds us, that those franchise owners for a long time did not have the ability to fix their own ice cream machines. You'd see the out-of-order signs. It was possible to get a McFlurry. And the reason why is only the technicians licensed by the company that was making McDonald's soft-serve ice cream machines were allowed to do the repairs. They had a limited number of technicians, so there were long waits for servicing. That's why those machines were broken. That's why you couldn't get a McFlurry. This shouldn't be that hard. And finally, we saw the Federal Trade Commission take action and call out the bad guy here. Now, the U.S. Copyright Office has issued a new set of exemptions, allowing restaurants to repair their own copyrighted equipment used in retail-level commercial food preparation. And yes, that means finally Mickey D's soft-serve ice cream machines should be getting back online. Those repairs should be moving. We'll see those McFlurries flying through again. But again, this is that same problem. Right to repair policy, which is what we're talking about, a right to repair. It's about the freedom across industries to fix stuff, to not let big companies and corporations gatekeep the information that people need to fix things. American people are hardworking. We have ingenuity. We know how to make repairs. This is about freedom in our economy, making sure that small business owners, whether it's auto shops, in this case, McDonald's franchise owners, can make repairs. I think it's fundamentally American to see that competition and to make sure that we're not seeing gatekeeping over who can fix things, whether it's a tractor or an ice cream machine, Mr. Speaker. We've also seen powerful companies use that power. It's not just greed, it's power, to jam us with fees, junk fees. They're often very deceptive, hidden at the end of a transaction. You see an advertised price, and all of a sudden there's fees at the end of the transaction, right as you go to check out, from tickets to flights and hotels, credit card fees, Mr. Speaker, food delivery apps. This has become pervasive in our economy. I was on one of the main streets in my district, Lincoln Avenue in Bellevue, about a year or so ago, talking with small businesses about these fees, these junk fees. I heard from the general manager of a pizza shop who told the story of how his customers in the business, they were suffering because of third-party delivery apps. They were seeing inconsistency between what was available on the menu and what customers were seeing. They were seeing big fees taken out of their orders. Customers were mad because service was getting worse. It wasn't working out for his business. In fact, I went next door to an ice cream shop, told them what I was here to work on at the pizza shop. They told me the same story. These apps were hurting their small business as well. In fact, that pizza shop had to rename. They hired their own delivery driver to bring it in, which was an expense, but it made their business better. It tells you how impactful and bad those hidden fees are on a small business owner like a restaurant, like a pizza shop. That they were willing to defend their reputation, defend their business, make an investment, hire in-house, change the name. But ultimately, it was worth doing that because of these predatory junk fees that we see from middlemen. It's unfortunately, though, the newest version of a story we've seen for far too long, a big corporation hurting a small business, Mr. Speaker, and third-party middlemen using these hidden fees to deceive customers into paying more. Again, it might be tickets, it might be a flight, it might be a hotel. And those junk fees often have very little connection to the service or the product being provided. I think they're a lose-lose for our local economy and for working families, but those junk fees might be a great profit source for a third-party middleman or a powerful corporation. I'll give an example. Most sports fans will be familiar here, Mr. Speaker. This past summer, I used StubHub to buy tickets to a Pittsburgh Pirates game. It was actually Paul Skeen's debut. I was pretty excited to see him show up for the Buccos. Took my family. We got jammed and slammed with junk fees like everyone else who buys tickets these days. More than a quarter of the overall ticket price. And those fees are often hid until the very end of the transaction. It's not the advertised price. Companies like Ticketmaster, which is owned by Live Nation, they control the market from tickets to venues to music promotion. Live Nation directly manages more than 400 artists, controls about 60% or so promotions at major concert venues across America, controls more than 265 concert venues in North America alone. And through Ticketmaster, Live Nation controls about 80% or more of major concert venues' primary ticketing for concerts. That's not competitive. It's not a competitive market, Mr. Speaker. What are they doing with that power? Well, they're driving up prices with things like junk fees. They're making activities like concerts and going to a game out of reach for too many families. These are important events, games, competitions. I mean, my goodness, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. A Steelers game or a Pens game or a Pirates game is a big deal for people. We love our teams. I know I'm not alone in that, in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, and fans are all paying for this. When these powerful companies cut exclusive deals that hurt venues, that restrict other venues, that rip off performers, it hurts a lot of people and it hurts the fans. This behavior seems to be more than just a ripoff. It's probably also illegal. I know the Justice Department's filed suit to split up Ticketmaster from Live Nation, and that case remains pending in the courts. But folks are tired of getting ripped off. They're tired of congressional inaction here. They expect us to take on this corporate power. We know that when massive corporations are allowed to take on small businesses and deceive their customers, we all pay for it. Western Pennsylvania certainly knows that story. We're not alone in that. And as I heard that day in Bellevue and across my district, small businesses are strong, they're resilient, they're flexible, they adapt. They need our help here in the Congress. It's about their workers and it's about our communities. I know that we can step up to it. We've got to do more. According to a 2019 study, 85% of Americans experienced a hidden or junk fee for service. And that was in 2019. And that was before the COVID pandemic, where we saw much more reliance on, say, food delivery. So I know that we've got to do more, and I'll quote the general manager from that pizza shop that day who told me, quote, "These fees may seem small, but they really add up." That's what it's all about, Mr. Speaker. Those fees hurting folks, hurting small businesses that we've got to stand up for, that we've got to fight back on. I want to also talk about our national security. Maybe not a place we think that consolidation affects us, but it does. I have the great privilege, Mr. Speaker, to serve on the Armed Services Committee. I wore the uniform before I came to this chamber and earlier in my life. I will tell you, we have challenges, the defense industrial base. We need it to be strong and resilient to meet the challenges, not just of today, but of tomorrow. And when it comes to our defense industrial base, the suppliers, the manufacturers that make stuff here, we need to have them do better. We got to better protect public money. Make sure our Department of Defense is ready and equipped to answer whatever our country might require of our service members. But we have seen the same trends we've seen across our economy in our defense industrial base. 1990, there were more than 51 prime contractors in our defense industrial base. That number now is down to 5. That is heavy consolidation. You see it right here. 51 to 5. These are the companies that make ships, missiles, rockets, you name it. All the things that we need that are central to our national security and our defense. And we've gone from 51 to 5. This reduction is depriving the American people of competition for key elements of our defense. And I hear it from military leaders in the committee. I've seen it in reports that the Pentagon has penned, that too often the current defense contractors, they're delivering not on timeline, they're behind schedule, the costs are too high, the quality isn't what it should be, what the American people expect. So we've got to fight back against this consolidation, Mr. Speaker. I think we need more competition in our defense industrial base. It's ripping off our military, which means ripping off the American people. There's public money we have to protect. So I think there's support building in this chamber, both sides of the aisle, to strengthen competition here to make sure our defense industrial base is stronger, to protect public money. I've taken action, along with colleagues. This year's National Defense Authorization Act, the defense bill, included My Best Price for Our Military Act. That's an important measure. It's a bipartisan bill. It closes a timing loophole that defense contractors were using to delay providing critical certified cost and pricing data to the Pentagon. My bill now requires these contractors provide this data before contract agreement so that we can see whether we're getting the best deal or whether we've got to go back to the negotiating table. It lets officers do a more informed analysis to be better stewards of public money. I hope to see this included in the final version of the defense bill that we will pass and send to the president. Now, I know the defense contractors and others, they lobby to increase the threshold point where they're required to report their pricing data to the Department of Defense under the Truth in Negotiations Act. In 2018, this threshold jumped from $750,000 up to $2 million. So up to $2 million, that meant below that threshold, they didn't have to provide that data. That's less oversight. I think we need more. The goal of our Defense Department is to provide security, defense for all of us, for the national interest of the United States. It never should have and doesn't have the goal to enrich giant defense corporations that produce products that are too often behind schedule, that are overpriced, that don't meet the quality that we expect, that we in the Congress require. We need to ensure that our sailors, our soldiers, our airmen, Marines, Guardians are equipped with the very best. That's patriotic, that we protect public money. So strengthening oversight, enforcement within DOD, to take on price gouging, to work with the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, all of that is about fostering more competition that we need in our defense industrial base. Corporate power doesn't just hurt competition in defense. It doesn't just lead to higher costs. It does those things. It puts our safety at risk. We saw it with the impact to families who are worried about finding baby formula, infant formula. We see it in sectors of the economy all over the country that when corporate power grows too strong, it can put us at risk. It can treat us and our communities like collateral damage in the way of their profits. We saw that on February 3rd, 2023. The Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, across the border from my district, my constituents in Beaver County in Pennsylvania. We saw it in the news, flaming pile of train cars, horrible derailment caused by incompetence and greed at that railroad. We saw brave first responders rush in to help. That's what people do. They rush in to help and serve others. They didn't know what chemicals they were dealing with, which is its own problem. Local communities felt like they were left out of the loop. They didn't know what was happening. And then we saw a decision to do a controlled release, sending a toxic fireball into the sky that we now know was chemicals, including vinyl chloride. That was later deemed to be unnecessary. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, their findings included concerns that Norfolk Southern and its contractors intentionally misled the on-site incident commander and local state officials, pressuring them to order the vent and burn that sent that fireball flying into the sky. Toxic chemicals. That's corporate power run amok. It hurt my constituents. It hurt our neighbors in Ohio. Now, it seemed to me that railroad and its contractors pushed that vent and burn because they cared more about their profit than our safety. They cared about getting rail operations moving more than they cared about making sure we were safe. That's unacceptable. It's not just my community in Western Pennsylvania, our neighbors in Ohio. We know tracks across this country. Communities like mine live near, along the tracks. This happens again, and it happens a lot in this country, unfortunately. We have to make rail safer. We have to bring down the rates of derailments, require more of these railroads. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield to one of our colleagues who I know is a strong supporter of rail safety, who's with us to make sure that we protect communities like ours. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, and I appreciate Representative Deluzio leading his voice on the House floor to speak to some of the injustice out there, and certainly representing a district that has the immense amounts of rail. It's important for us to address safety. It's important to address consumer ridership and also to address the economy. Over these past months and years, we've seen far too many hardworking Americans struggling to get by and crippled by rising costs. And recent data show that more than 1/4 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And so we need to be sensitive to all these perspectives as they relate to working families. Meanwhile, corporate greed and wealth disparity are at an all-time high. And one of the countless recent examples of billion-dollar corporations putting profits over people's lives came during and after Hurricanes Helene and Milton made landfall, wreaking death and destruction across the southeastern United States. In their wake, complaints of price gouging poured in as families trying to flee the devastating storms reported skyrocketing costs for airline tickets, for gas, for hotel rooms, and more. Despite many states having anti-price gouging laws, these vary from state to state, and the largest corporations can often easily avoid liability. That's why last month I joined a dozen of my Democratic colleagues in a letter led by Senator Elizabeth Warren calling for a federal anti-price gouging law to protect American consumers. Unchecked corporate greed has hurt everyday Americans for far too long, and Democrats are ready to face down this issue head on. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that President-elect Trump and Republicans share the same commitment. Rather than working with us to drive down the cost of living and make big corporations pay their fair share, they have announced their plans to expand the Trump tax scam. Expanding this unpopular law will only further cement massive tax breaks for Trump's billionaire buddies like Elon Musk, while sticking the working class people who voted for him with higher costs on everyday goods through his half-baked tariff scheme. Experts from both sides of the aisle have said plainly that if these GOP policies are implemented, they will send prices surging and claw back any progress we've made to stem inflation. These are not the types of policies that the American people signed up for. Republicans and Democrats alike need to stand together to enact a bipartisan tax plan that would lower taxes for working and middle-class families while ensuring everyone pays their fair share, including Trump's billionaire buddies. If they aren't willing to join us in this effort to support middle-class Americans, we'll fight back however we can, and that's a promise. And of course, it involves all sorts of angles that speak to the doability of working families, making certain that with regulations that speak to the needs of consumers, with rail safety, with growing the economy, with providing for efficiencies so that American families are justly served, we need to do a lot of business in the upcoming session, and we need to do it with the American families in mind, those working families who struggle in the economy, yet where we need to make improvements, and fairness be our guide. So with that, I yield back and thank Congressman Deluzio for his leadership on behalf of working families, on behalf of safety. I know we both have districts that require that sort of laser-sharp focus, and it's an honor to serve with you, and thank you for raising your voice and boldly speaking for justice for our American consumers.
Speaker, thank you. I thank the gentleman from New York for his strong words and commitment to his constituents, to safety, to hardworking people having a shot at the American dream, which fundamentally is what I think we all want here. And we heard from members representing districts across the country, a broad ideological spectrum of folks tonight, all talking about ways that corporate power has hurt their communities or hurt their constituents, has hurt competition, and expressing their willingness, our shared willingness to fight back for our constituents. I represent a competitive district. I will say, Mr. Speaker, I have the best district in the country. I might get some argument from colleagues here about that. This is a place, like so many others, where folks want the American dream to be strong. I think every member here would say the same of their constituents, that if you work hard, you play by the rules, the American dream is within your reach. That's what we're trying to do. I've been laser focused, as have so many of our colleagues here, about lowering costs, taking on corporate power to protect small businesses and workers, fighting against lousy trade deals that hurt places like Western Pennsylvania, making more stuff in this country, more manufacturing, cracking down on junk fees, on price gouging that's really hurting folks and really hurting our main streets. These economic priorities, they're good policy and they're popular because the American people want us to fight for them. They don't want to get ripped off. They want to see real American capitalism that is marked by competition. Right? The survey data here is clear. This is a poll from ABC News and Washington Post from July. 85% of Americans say higher costs is a very important issue, or one of the single most important issues that they feel that we should confront. There's a tendency by some politics to try and please everybody. Okay. I'm a little sick and tired, though, of folks around here, whether they're in this chamber or out in the think tanks or whatever, looking for a win-win in every situation. You know what? Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes when there's a toxic fireball shot up into the sky near your community, when there are small pharmacies getting killed, when there are junk fees hurting your constituents, sometimes there's a bad guy, and you got to fight him. American people want us to fight for them. I'm proud to see so many of my colleagues join me in that fight, and the goal here is simple, and it's popular. Make life better. Make it less of a ripoff. Take on the corporate power that's been hurting so many of us. I think that's the path back to the American dream, along with strengthening, revitalizing our American manufacturing. Sometimes you call out the villain. I know we need more competition across our economy. We need to be unafraid of the fight when we have to do it. That we are ready to go to the mat for the American people, for our constituents, to strengthen the American dream. That's the vision. That's my vision. I know I'm not alone in that. It's one that I know will resonate in the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, the coast, all over this country. Now, I want to thank my colleagues, my caucus members who join me. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate your leadership, and with that, I'll yield the balance of my time.